In this video, we're going to answer an inquiry from a community viewer that is requesting an enhancement to exclude users from MFA when working in machines that are in zoneless mode. This is actually something that we don't necessarily need to do because the policy engine can accomplish this, and I'll show you in this video how to do that. But first, what are you looking at? You're looking at my environment that consists of a couple of domain controllers, right? It also has a member server and it has a management server that is going to be where we're going to be configuring things, right? So first and foremost, we need a Windows system that is domain joined and also configured for Centrify MFA. So this is the configuration applet. We're going to add a service. We're going to pick our tenant. And then when we pick our tenant, we're going to pick, what is that we want to enforce. So here we're going to say that we want Windows authentication at login and that we want to enable this for all Active Directory accounts, right? So this has a specific effect, and the effect is that every account that logs in interactively by way of the console, like in this case, or RDP, they will be challenged for multi-factor. Obviously, they need to be able to satisfy that multi-factor challenge with a mechanism that the Centrify platform knows about. So let's go ahead and test it. So we're testing with Diana, right? And notice that Diana is going to be challenged. Notice all the mechanisms here. I'm not doing MFA because I'm just making my life easy by answering a security question. Don't do that because that is not aligned with NIST 800-54. So 53. So that being said, what if you have a problem and you want to exclude certain accounts from MFA because they may be impaired, maybe maybe the client is not as advanced. So there's a way to do this, even if the applet to configure the Windows client from Centrify does not allow you to do that. And the answer is in the policy engine of the platform. So I'm going to go to my management server, and here notice that I have the Centrify management platform, right? And we're going to start with a role, and MFA exclusion is typically like an exception. So you want to make sure that you have a role that has those exempted users. For example, right? We have a user called Diana, and Diana is going to be the one that is going to be exempted from MFA. So I'm going to add her to that group. I don't need to give her any administrative rights whatsoever. And by the way, I could add an AD group or basically any user from a connected directory that is supported, like LDAP, Active Directory, Google Directory, and even federated user. So I'm going to go ahead and save. And now I can create a policy, right? Policies can be scoped to be applied to every user or to a set of users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a policy set, and I'm going to create my test policy. What I'm doing here is I'm going to make sure that this only applies to specified roles, and I'm going to add my test role here. So what we're saying here in summary is the policy that I'm defining here will only apply to my test role. Next, we're going to set the authentication profiles. And notice that you have Centrify services, you have clients, the ones that are for PaaS, and then you have the typical Centrify server switch agents, right? There's several categories here. Privilege elevation, that applies when you're doing DZ-do or you're doing run with privilege or new desktop. Windows workstations, that will apply to Windows workstation SKUs like Windows 7, Windows 10. And then there's what we do for Linux, Unix, and Windows servers, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to enable this rule. We don't need to add any additional conditional logic, but what we're going to do here, because this is an exception, we're going to say always allowed, right? And we're going to save that, right? First and foremost, we are ready to test, but we're going to verify first that we're still enforcing MFA. I have another user, Lisa. So I'm going to use Lisa to make sure that we continue to enforce MFA, and then we're going to go to Diana to make sure that our exception is working. So Lisa Simpson wants to log in, and she'll be challenged for multi-factor because she's not in the exception list, right? And we said we're going to challenge every Active Directory user in this case. So notice that she was able to log in, satisfied the two challenges. But now we're going to test our exclusion, right? And we're going to have Diana try to log in. Notice here, we're still connecting to the authentication service, but what we did was that the client basically asked the platform, what is the effective policy that applies for this user? And then it's going to look into here and it's going to say, well, there's a policy that is, notice this works like a firewall. You go from the very specific to the general here, and typically this one ends being your catch-all, where you want to make sure that you have a deny all. So what it does, it checks for the policy and sees, well, there's a policy that applies to specify roles, a role that Diana belongs to, that basically says that for Centrify Server Suite agents, in this case Windows servers, we are going to make sure that they're always allowed. So, and that's how you can set up an exception, even if your software doesn't allow you to set it up in this particular dialog box here. So the fact that you don't have, when you're modifying the Centrify identity platform, that you don't have the flexibility to do it at the client level, doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot do an exclusion using the powerful policy engine. And I hope this helps, and let us know how we can continue to improve our products.